the type of man he was and how we learnt of him, hearing about the millions of rands that were pumped into ANC campaigns, and of course his links to to President Cyril Ramaphosa, that 500,000 rand donation. What do we know, and how did we become aware of this man in the midst of all this political doings, dealings?
And unfortunately, Mpho, the tendency is that people will only remember the latter day Gavin Watson because of the controversies that, rightly questions have to be asked about his role in Bosasa, and rightly questions have to be asked about his donations to the CR17 campaign and what the implications thereof are. But, to discount the history of the Watson brothers would be, unfortunate to basically narrow it down to the latter day period, the period when he was now in charge and at the helm of Bosasa. We know that he donated that 500,000 rand to the CR17 campaign, and my goodness, what problems has it caused for President Cyril Ramaphosa trying to explain how exactly the money flow was for that donation. What has since transpired with that 500,000 rand? Has it been returned? Has it been transferred to an attorney's account? All those questions linger. The operations of the various accounts of the CR17 campaign that have been laid bare by, amongst others, the leaked bank statements. That's the one thing. But we also know from the testimony of Angelo Agrizzi what an operator, certainly on the version of Angelo Agrizzi, Gavin Watson was when, during his tenure as head of Bosasa, the company that's now known as Africa Global Operations. You'll remember that video that showed Gavin Watson counting cash in a vault at Bosasa there, and we were told that this was R1 million that was being prepared to pay off for one or other reasons, and also the carrying of favor with various politicians. The allegations that he certainly would call in favors and also would call on Angelo Agrizzi. Agrizzi says a lot of the times when there was an event to be staged, he would get a call from Gavin Watson at the 11th hour that would say, there's a birthday for then President Jacob Zuma. Let's do something about it. And he would then, Agrizzi that is, would have to spring into action. But as I say, the family does have a history, the Watson brothers. So if we care to go back all the way to their involvement with the rugby fraternity, where they come from in the Eastern Cape, and how certainly Dan Chicky Watson is the one that's almost iconic of the family name, in that insisting on playing with black players at a time of segregation, when there were, many opportunities for him and his brothers. Valance is the other brother. You also have Chicky's son, Luke Watson, who was selected for the Springboks and also became controversial himself, of course, for having said that when he looks at the Springbok jersey, it makes him want to vomit. But, that's really the history of the family involvement with the struggle against apartheid, and basically that their interactions with the black community in the Eastern Cape, in the area of Port Elizabeth, at a time when segregation was the in thing in South African politics.
You speak about Angelo Agrizzi's testimony at the Zondo Commission, and really what we know also that Agrizzi said was that Watson had, Gavin Watson had a very good relationship with former President Jacob Zuma, and it almost made him feel untouchable.
Yeah, so part of the testimony of Angelo Agrizzi is that this was the modus operandi at Bosasa, which is now Africa Global Operations, that they would basically, cast their eye forward, as it were, to sort of predict who's going to rise in terms of leadership in the ANC, and basically they would then ingratiate themselves with that particular person. So for a period of time, that person was the then president of the ANC and the country, President Jacob Zuma. And so things like the funding and paying for the expenses for his birthday and making provision for that, but also allegations that were then made by Angelo Agrizzi that implicate people such as Nomvula Mokonyane, for example, the kind of support that certainly on the version of Angelo Agrizzi was extended to various leaders of the ANC. But you also have questions that have been asked about Bosasa's support for, people such as Gwede Mantashe, the installment of security at his properties here in Gauteng, but also in the Eastern Cape. Of course, he has presented his version as the ANC national chairperson. But the story doesn't end there. Gavin Watson's association with ANC leadership, he is, definitely associated even with the current leadership of the ANC, not only through that 500,000 rand donation, which I remember asking President Cyril Ramaphosa about when he came to Newzroom Africa to say, do you believe that Gavin Watson was trying to corrupt you when he made the donation? And President Ramaphosa answering that actually he doesn't believe that was the intent on the part of Gavin Watson, and certainly then saying that if that was the intent, he would not have found cooperation. That's the version of the president. But also you'll know from the pictures that emerged recently showing or purporting to show the wedding party taking pictures at Andile Ramaphosa's wedding in Uganda. And somewhere there you had circled by some on social media when that picture hit social media, a few rows behind President Cyril Ramaphosa and the other people at the front. Gavin Watson was certainly one of the people that were there. So questions being asked about the proximity or otherwise of Gavin Watson to the current president of the ANC. He donates to his campaign, attends his son's wedding, did business, did Africa Global Operations with Andile Ramaphosa, business that President Cyril Ramaphosa now says Andile acknowledges that this is a relationship, a business relationship that he certainly regrets.
Now, speaking about President Cyril Ramaphosa and this 500,000 rand, and which is like a political hot potato, which, we know that, unfortunately, this passing comes at a time where the public protector was meant to get answers herself from Gavin Watson.
And not only the public protector, Mpho, it leaves us with a situation where, in as far as the state capture allegations involving Africa Global Operations, formerly Bosasa, are concerned, the only version we have now is that of Angelo Agrizzi. We will never get to have Gavin Watson coming forward and being asked about, hang on, in a country where carrying wads of cash and sort of using cash is frowned upon in terms of our anti-money laundering rules and how we handle the flow of money in our economy. In a country like that, how is it that there's a video of you counting all those wads of cash that are believed to have been about R1 million? What were you going to do about that? And certainly the testimony of Agrizzi is that Gavin Watson's approach to cash was that, money was no object. If you want to be in with the decision makers, if you want to be in with the people that are taking, certainly as we show now, pictures, previous pictures of Gavin Watson with various politicians. We'll never get to hear his version of what exactly happened, how it all transpired, how Africa Global Operations, Bosasa, ran. This is a company that enjoys that holds a number of contracts, held a number of contracts, because since the revelations of Angelo Agrizzi, government departments and entities have been tripping over each other to try and cancel some of these contracts. One of the biggest, of course, being the operations at Lindela Repatriation Center on behalf of the Department of Home Affairs. A week and a half ago, the Minister of Home Affairs telling me that that contract remains in place, albeit with the business rescue practitioner who's in place on behalf of Africa Global Operations, but a number of others in the correctional services being reviewed and actually being cancelled in a number of companies. So that's the story of Gavin Watson, who, according to information from our sources, has passed on.
Yeah, and lastly, Thulas, before you go, we know that SARS was also gunning for Watson, trying to find out whether he had hid money and really on his tail to try find out exactly his financial affairs and you know, how they can cash in.
Yeah, definitely. Those questions were always bound to arise in the context in which you have this evidence. And not forgetting also, Mpho, that the operations of Africa Global Operations, Bosasa, had been a subject of various investigations, including the Special Investigating Unit, which had a report out that was not actioned, was not acted upon. And now we did see, you know, around the time following the testimony of Angelo Agrizzi, we finally did see some kind of movement by way of arrests linked to Africa Global Operations. So he said his passing certainly comes at a time when he's in the center of a storm, really, raging in the country around issues of corruption and state capture. And as we say, we will never get to hear his version of what exactly was happening at Africa Global Operations, also known as Bosasa.
Thank you so much, our political editor, Thulasizwe Simelane. Just expanding, of course, this is a developing story. The details are still sketchy. For more on this breaking story, we're now joined on the line by SAPS, the spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Katlego Mogale. Lieutenant Colonel, good morning to you and thank you for joining us. So we've just learned of a horrific car crash that occurred here. What exactly happened?
I said that this morning at about 5:30, a 73-year-old man was involved in a car accident wherein he lost control of the vehicle and it collided with a concrete pillar, and he was certified dead on the scene by paramedics. At this stage, a case of culpable homicide has been opened for investigation, and his identity cannot be revealed as his next of kin are yet to be informed of his passing.
And just to get a little bit more detail on the scene of the accident, when your officers came to the scene, what exactly did you discover?
They discovered that the vehicle has collided with the barrier and it was in a very bad state. One of his axles was on the floor.
And do we know if there were any other occupants in the vehicle?
At this stage, it seemed he was the only person in the vehicle.
And just, Colonel, talk us through the time period at which this happened and any other details regarding perhaps the speed of the car and any other contributing factors you believe may have added to this unfortunate incident.
At this stage, that is being what the people this morning were trying to gather at the crime scene, and we are busy with the docket, and those are part of the investigation detail.
And there's been suggestions that, you know, before this accident, he had just come out of the airport and going into his vehicle and heading home. Can you confirm any of those suggestions that have come out?
From what we have gathered at the crime scene is that he was coming from direction Johannesburg into the airport, not out of the airport.
Absolutely. And in terms of your investigations, just talk us through what exactly you are investigating to come to some conclusions with this accident.
We are investigating a case of culpable homicide, and we will investigate all how and why the accident occurred.
And have you been in contact with the deceased's family at all?
The investigators are busy at this stage to go and inform them of his passing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, SAPS spokesperson, Katlego Mogale, giving us some detail. Of course, the details are still sketchy. Police are still not naming the deceased, as we know. Of course, this is a developing story, and we will continue to give you more information as